Work started by dealing mainly with my own person. I focusing on me, I concentrating on me, I paying attention to me. A lot of that stuff brought in the notion of applying stress to myself. Can this stress put me in a kind of weakened position where I become more available for a viewer? Once I'm in a weakened position, can viewer come closer to me? What I had always wanted from pieces that focus on person was a making of a kind of intimate space where I am somewhat alone with you, with you, the viewer. That intimate space then started to cause problems. It seemed to me that as long as I was there live in a piece, there was always a personality there. Stuff began to be installations, spaces that a viewer could walk through, a viewer could be. So the installation started to have probably basic shapes. I started to deal a lot with a basic table and chair area, thinking in terms of exhibition as a kind of community meeting place. Gallery, museum, whatever. This was a public place where people would gather together anyway. From there, I think pieces started to be from using piece as a kind of meeting place. More recently, I think pieces have gone through a kind of machine stage. Space as prop for a machine that can be activated by viewer. They started from the particular physical space they were in. In other words, if I was given a space that had columns, I would inevitably do a piece that used those columns as kinds of support, use those columns as a base. If a space was a space with windows, then a piece would necessarily have something that would start inside and go out that window, or start outside, come in that window. I began to wonder about that notion of constantly fitting a piece into a space. I began to wonder, am I constantly adjusting to a space? Am I constantly adapting to a space? I guess I began to be worried about things like, well, if you live in a room where the ceilings happen to be only 5 or 6 feet tall, then you almost learn automatically to stoop. You learn automatically to bend. So I began to wonder about this adjustment. Am I constant, since obviously most of the things I'm doing are done in gallery spaces, museum spaces, does this adaptation to physical space mean that I'm constantly adapting myself to institutions? Am I constantly adapting myself to this kind of institutionalized use? So for maybe the last year or so, I've probably been more interested in the notion of, rather than a piece starting from and fitting into the space that's given, I've been more interested in the notion of a piece passing through a space. The notion of vehicle has interested me lately. The idea of piece as vehicle, piece as car, bicycle, whatever, that can pass through whatever space is available, can hook onto that space for the time being, then can possibly pass on to another space, use that space. Probably have this really romanticized notion of artist as a kind of guerrilla fighter. You're given a terrain, you do something according to that terrain, you set up something, pick that something up, go to the next terrain, whatever. So the very recent pieces, probably as an attempt to get away from starting from an existent space, probably the most recent pieces have been concerned with sort of setting up a space of their own, bringing a piece bringing a space of its own with it, almost like a turtle bringing its shell, bringing its own home with it. So the recent pieces have sort of dealt in general with some kind of vehicle that drags along some kind of house, some kind of shelter. There's a piece called Instant House about a month and a half ago. On each side of this wooden frame was a wall, so 4 walls around this frame. A 5 by 8 wall on each side. The walls are composed of a flag. The walls are made up of a flag, an American flag. So as you come into the space, there are these 4 American flags lying down on the ground. There are these cuts in the American flag that are these window and door shapes, though probably when they're on the ground, they aren't really read that way. There's a swing hanging down from the ceiling in the middle. if you sit on the swing, if a viewer sits on the swing, as viewer sits on the swing goes down and walls rise up around you. The walls are then, you're making this American flag house for yourself, this house composed of American flags, but on the other side of the American flag, on the other side of the American flag is a Russian flag. So you made this kind of American flag house for yourself, Russian flag, Russian house for the outside. Okay, so always that kind of building a house thing. This new piece is called high rise. What's interested me lately in the use of wall has been the use of wall as a kind of wall as the presentation of an image, wall as a presentation of propaganda. I mean, I realized lately a lot of the pieces haven't used sound. They haven't used sound because the image is taking the place of sound. In other words, if you have an American flag, then you don't need the sound of Star Spangled Banner. The flag presents a kind of propaganda on its own. So I was thinking in terms of this piece as how do I make these walls act as a kind of propaganda bearer. So I was thinking, first of all, what do these walls consist in? What do I cover the frames with? And I came upon this plastic idea mainly through Steve's help. I was mentioning to Steve, what would you build a wall with if you only had fabric to work with? And he mentioned to me, what about looking outside? A building in the act of being built always has a kind of plastic covering. At the point where some kind of vehicle would have to erect this building. Because the thing started out in low form, there would be these panels on the ground that would rise up. I wanted the vehicle to be low. So I didn't want things I had used in the past, like bicycle, tricycle. I wanted something to stay. I wanted what was going to pull this thing up. I wanted that to be relatively low, or almost as low as the panels were going to be to begin with. So I thought just in general of some kind of cart mechanism. You would pull the cart towards this thing. As you pulled the cart towards this thing would rise up in front of you. So you drive towards a point. This point becomes a building. This point becomes a building. As you drive towards this destination rises up in front of you. Okay, what was this destination? What was this destination going to be? We had these, it was a matter of building walls. Walls had to bear something. What could these walls bear? Playing around then with the idea of high rise, there was almost nowhere else to go. What these walls would raise a kind of propaganda. These walls would raise a kind of dirty joke. These walls would raise an image, a kind of conventional cultural slogan prick that would act as a kind of wall to keep anyone else out. What the thing started to get involved with then was not everybody could raise those walls, or maybe everybody could raise it one floor, but only the stronger could raise it two. Only those still stronger could raise it three, get to the top. So we began to think in terms of something kind of carnival-like. You bring down the hammer, you ring the bell, but only the very strong can bring this thing up to the top. So then I began to think, oh, obviously the thing is making sense. In order to raise this prick as high as it can go, all you have to do on one hand is be very strong. On the other hand, when you're very strong, you have to sort of be a little boy again. Get in this cart, drive this cart forward, and then while driving this cart forward, it becomes this kind of macho high rise, or only the very strong can really do it. When I was first thinking about the structure, I was pretty insistent on having one side be composed of floors that then contained windows and doors. The reason I think was basic because I wanted immediately that image of a house, the image of a building. Otherwise it would be a raising of fabric. by having the windows and doors. It will be a raising of a building that then in turn could use its fabric, use its walls to hold an image. What interested me then about the windows and doors was the conventional face likeness of it. So that raising a building would be a matter of raising a number of faces, raising a kind of, on one side, raising a kind of monster's head, monster's face. On the other side, another kind of monster's head.
Repeat that?